now I have the pleasure to give you Rabbi Emanuel and the Kabbalah.
Thank you again. So, I was ordained from the Reform movement of Judaism, which, like in Christianity, we have a variety of denominations, although far fewer. And the Reform movement is definitely on the more liberal theological side of things. And with its roots in the Enlightenment and the rationalism and science of the Industrial Revolution, for a long time it did not have a great deal of time for mysticism. When Kabbalah started to gain in popularity at the end of the 20th century, and people started wondering, would it be taught as part of our rabbinical schools teaching? The story is, and it might be an urban legend, but it's too good to check, that one of the professors was asked, will you teach a class on mysticism? And he said, we do not teach rubbish, but we might teach a class on the history of rubbish. And in that light, a while back, I started teaching a class on Kabbalah for Rationalists, or with the subtitle, How to Get the Most Out of Mysticism If You're Not a Mystic. And so what I want to do today is to share some of that, and with the recognition I am not a Kabbalist, I am not a mystic, but I think there's a lot that can be learned from mysticism in general, and from my perspective, from Jewish mysticism in particular, that provide larger life lessons, regardless of whether you are, in fact, truly mystically inclined. Now, first of all, let me be clear. I'm going to be teaching about 2,000 years of collected mystical Jewish thought in about 20 minutes, so bear with me. And before I can even really delve into Jewish mysticism, I have to explain a little bit, well, what's mysticism, really? So we all think about times when we feel that we're spiritual, where we feel a connection to God. You're holding a child after their birth. You see the Grand Canyon. You feel something is special, and you've broken through into the spiritual reality that is sort of behind the facade of our physical world. And mysticism essentially doubles down on that and says not only is the true reality not this physical world, but the spiritual divine reality behind it, but that ability to connect and understand isn't just about those sort of random, spontaneous moments, but there's a system. If you know exactly what to do, how to meditate in a particular way, different ways of looking at the world and texts and connecting, you will be able systematically through that secret esoteric knowledge to connect and understand the larger truths of the universe. And there aren't many Reform mystics, but one by the name of Rabbi Lawrence Kushner described it to a class I was in once as, if you remember those Scooby-Doo cartoons that you used to watch, and at one point in every cartoon, Scooby and Shaggy are accidentally pull on a book or a statue in a library, and a secret room is opened up. And so mysticism essentially is knowing which book to pull, knowing the system of knowledge of how to open up that secret room and understand what's truly behind it all. And you can do that with with a sort of an intellectual mysticism, which is where if you know how to see the connections in the universe, you'll be able to understand. And in Judaism, one of the aspects of that is what's called gematria, which is Jewish numerology, where the letters of the Hebrew language are also numbers. And so if you find numerical connections between them, then that has meaning. So that, for instance, the Hebrew word for father and the Hebrew word for mother, if you add the numerical values together, comes out as the same numerical value as the Hebrew word for child. And in mysticism, that is understood as being very significant. That tells you something. And there's also, as we saw, meditative practices where through actions, through dancing, through meditation, through all kinds of things like that, you can experience something greater. So how does that work in Judaism? Well, for a couple of thousand years, Judaism has developed a variety of different kinds and aspects of mystical thought. I'm going to give you a very potted history of it right now, starting with the idea that God, in God's true essence, is what's called the Ein Sof, the infinite, the without end. And that what we experience of God and how God is experienced in the universe is through what are called sphirot, basically aspects of God that emanate into the universe. In the same way that you are not right now connecting with my mind like a Vulcan mind meld, but you are connecting with my mind through my voice, through my facial expressions, because I'm Jewish, through my hand gestures. And so, in the same way, we connect to God through these sphirot, and also those sphirot connect to each other. This is a large part of that song I sung at the beginning, where the idea is that the sphirot, some of them are masculine, some of them are feminine, and they all interconnect. And that interconnection is the source of creation and understanding and love and truth and mercy and all these other aspects. Now, all of this eventually comes together when a group of Jews find themselves in a place called Tzfat in the mountain, hilly regions of Israel, where they set up a mystical colony. It's now an artist colony as well. Lovely place to go. And the reason they were there, which has bearing to what they're about to come up with, was that in 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, and the Jews are expelled from Spain. And many of them moved to Turkey, to North Africa, but a few, these more mystically inclined, move to Tzfat in Israel. And there, eventually, a young man by the name of Isaac Luria, one of those people that sort of shines brightly and then sadly passes away in their early 30s, takes all of the earlier mysticism and weaves it together into a cohesive quilt by telling an amazing story. And it's an alternative story of creation, which, depending on how you understand it, is either what was happening before the biblical story of creation, or is the sort of the mystical background, the inner workings of what was happening. And in this story, these people whose lives had been shattered by an exile, in essence imagine something similar with what's going on with God. Luria argues that the world, the universe before us, was all God. There was only God, and so God essentially has to exile God's self from a space, what's called tzimtzum, that act of exile, of self-exile. And into that space are created the vessels of creation. And then God shines a beam of divine light. By the way, Madonna's album, Ray of Light, that's what it's about. I'm not kidding. Yeah. Shines this divine light into the vessels of creation, but essentially they can't handle the truth. They shatter. And in that shattering, the physical world is essentially created so that everything in the physical world has within it trapped some of that divine light, the sparks of the divine. And these exiled people whose lives in Spain had been shattered and who were, in essence, powerless except for a few things they had power over, particularly being able to do traditional Jewish mitzvot, traditional Jewish rituals and practices, they come to the conclusion that the most powerful thing you can do in the world is to, in fact, do those traditional Jewish commandments and practices and to engage in good deeds, because every single time you do a good deed, every time you help someone else, every time you give tzedakah, charity, every time you pray over your food to thank God for what you're about to receive, every time you do any small act of kindness, what you're actually doing is freeing the spark of the divine within that thing, within that act, within the physical object or reality with which you're relating. So all of this, I realize, sounds quite esoteric and a little weird. And if you think it sounds that way, you're right. But the real question is, so okay, you're not Jewish, or in my case, you are Jewish, but you're not a mystic. What do you do with this? I think there are some important lessons. The first is that in this incredibly individualistic world in which we live, this mystical story tells us that everything is connected. The Sfirot, everything is connected one to the other, and the way in which in all of these connections mean that no matter what we do, no matter how we act, we're connecting to the universe, to each other, to the world, to our families, to our friends, to God. Nothing is truly individual and separate, and so we should act that way. It also teaches us that God, the divine, is found in everything. These sparks of the divine are in everything with which we interact, in every person, in every scene, in every piece of the world, in the environment, in our friends, in our family, in our country, in our city, and yes, even in our politicians and cultural leaders, although they are definitely working to they seem to be definitely working to do a lot of enforcing the klipot, to enforce the things that are trapping the sparks of the divine rather than freeing them. But in everything, we can feel and see and interact with the sparks of the divine. And so when we meditate, when we pray, when we do good deeds, when we connect with each other, we find ways to interact with the divine in the world and interact with the divine in each other in each of those acts. Perhaps the most significant lesson at the end of the day, the one that I think I take away most significantly, is that if we look back at that story and we look at the way that mystical thinkers in Judaism have taken that story, there's a really important aspect that's in that story that isn't immediately obvious until you point it out and you go, of course. Which is in this world that's shattered, what is it that helps unshatter the world? It's us. It's our actions, which provides this amazing idea that we are actually partners with God in the act of creating. Because if creation is shattered, then if everything we do is helping God recreate the world and perfect it, then what that means is God needs us. In a world in which so many of us lack purpose, so many of us find an emptiness in life, the idea that God, that the world, needs us, not because we can do great and mighty things that change everything, but because we can help someone across the road, because we can make someone smile, because we can give a little to charity, we can give a friend a helping hand, because we can embrace people who are not embraced, because we can love and accept people who are not loved and accepted. Because of all of these things, we are needed. Even if the way we are needed and the way we can help is small, that's an amazing and powerful lesson of the purpose of humanity in life. And I will leave you with that.